Welcome to the Transformative Pathways Podcast with your host, Jason Doby. Join Jason as he explores the many ways to unlock personal growth, mindfulness, and spiritual transformation. So now, please welcome the host of Transformative Pathways, Jason Doby.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Jason Doby, founder of Transformative Pathways Life Coaching. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we'll be discussing building lasting change through self-knowledge with our guest, Sarah Green, who's joining us today from the UK. Sarah is passionate about creating space for individuals to reconnect with who they truly are, beyond the expectations of who they think they should be. Sarah brings a rich background in personal and leadership development to her current focus on one-on-one transformational career coaching. Having spent 13 years in a misguided role within an unhealthy workplace culture, Sarah courageously closed that chapter and redefined her own path. Now she helps others navigate their own rewarding career shifts. Her coaching philosophy is grounded in the belief that meaningful career changes should honor both your professional potential and the life you want to create, while letting go of the limiting stories and expectations holding you back. Sarah, welcome to the show, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Jason. Thank you so much for having me. And fantastic kind of overview. It sounds very impressive.
Yes, it does. Yeah, you have an impressive resume. All right, Sarah. So to start things off, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became a transformational career coach?
Yeah, sure. Wow. Well, like most of us, it's a multi-layered journey, multi-layered story. So I'll try to keep it relatively straightforward. Working from today and going backwards is probably the best way to do it. So now I work as a holistic career coach, really, to keep it simple. So I help people consider what their life looks like on the whole and where work, fits into that and how the two things can work together and to create, a kind of holistic way of being in the world that allows them to enjoy work, have a career, stability, without having to sacrifice the actual family, wealth, fitness, all of those other goals that people are working towards. Historically, it seems that sometimes we have to sacrifice one for the other. And I've kind of ended up here after my own experience. So I've been coaching for about 13 years within an organizational setting, professional development, leadership development, etc. But I realized that there was a space that I wanted to move into, which focused more on moving beyond the job title, moving beyond, that 40, 50 years that some of us will be working. Do we really want to just be a job title Monday to Friday and then trying to fit life in at the weekend? There must be a better way of doing it. And yeah, I think that's probably it in the simplest form. And of course, we can touch on more of that story as we go along.
Yeah, sounds great. It's funny. I always laugh at the whole the Monday to Friday thing because I was a chef for my whole life.
Wow.
So
yeah.
I used to dream of having a Monday to Friday job.
Yeah.
I used to dream. And it's so funny because everyone talks about like, oh, getting away from the 9 to 5. And I just laugh because like I've been wanting my whole life to get that 9 to 5 job.
Yeah. And I do wonder if on some level, that's the point, isn't it? That it's like, how do we find what works for us? Because even in the 9 till 5, kind of framework, I don't know many people that really work in 9 to 5. People are working a lot more often than that. Some people having to work at a second job, so it's how do we find our own way in the world of having a work life, an actual life within that.
Mm-hmm. I know the biggest thing for me in my career. So I was a chef for 26 years and I loved my job until, I don't know, maybe the last 15 years, I wasn't really loving it. And I knew that I needed a change. but I didn't know what that change was. And I was really good at my job, and I was really successful at my job. But I remember I used to always say, like, I've worked so hard to get to where I am now. What am I going to do? And I used to just say,
Yeah.
I guess I'm just kind of stuck with where I am at
Yeah.
now. I'm not going to start over. And then,
Yeah.
then it took me, then when I was 42 years old, I finally realized, like, I can't live like this anymore because
Mm-hmm.
I'm just so unhappy. And,
Yeah.
I never saw my kids. I never had time with my family. I worked every weekend. I worked, every holiday. But I don't know what the moral is, where I'm going with this, but what do you think is the biggest thing that holds people back, in working a job that they don't like, or that's not serving them? What do you think is the biggest thing that's holding people back from making a change?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, and that's a question. So to start with, when I first thought, oh yeah, career coaching, I'm going to try and niche, I'm going to try and specialize a little bit, because most people that I work with in life coaching, work's a big part of that. So, and then as I moved more into the conversation around career, it made me realize that actually there is so much that we carry around with us, that, what we think that we should be doing, what we're good at technically, but don't necessarily enjoy, expectations that we have from family or friends that are there, years, 20 years for some of us, that have been in a profession for a long time and don't want to give it up, like you said, because we've worked so hard to get there, but it doesn't make us happy. So people bring all sorts into the space in terms of, what is it? It's hard to pinpoint that one reason, but actually deep down, it's what are they looking for? So what is the difference that they want to make? And actually the barriers that get in the way for people, it's the conditioning that most of us have had, that actually this is what we should do. This is what success should look like. And actually, this is where the self-knowledge and the holistic element comes in, that when we start peeling back the labels and what we should do and what success should look like, and tune into, well, what about me? This is my one life. I'll get 80 years if I'm lucky, So how do I actually tune into me within that space? What does success look like for me? So it's kind of really going back to the definitions for people individually.
And I'm curious, what sort of work do you do around, when you talk about the self-knowledge? Can you talk a little bit about that, like how that works?
Yeah, wow. I mean, and that's my favorite part, because my own personal experience is that, wherever we go, there we are. So actually, we kind of need to know how we're going to show up, what's going on for us, how are we getting in our own way sometimes. So if we're getting to a point we're going to make a big decision in life about work, for some people that could just be a promotion. Some people it could be a complete career shift. But regardless, if we're in a space of wanting to make a decision that we want to live with and be comfortable with, we need to know what we're bringing to the table. We need to know, how can we show up? How will we see this through? Where am I going to do really well? Where might I need some support? What are my values? What are some of the beliefs that I'm holding on to that are holding me back? But to be fair, for a lot of us, and maybe, you can resonate a little bit here, that until we get to a certain point in life, we haven't even considered a lot of that stuff.
No.
We've just been on autopilot. So if we're going to make a big decision, we kind of need some self-knowledge there. And it's the gathering the data, gather that information. So yes, there's the work. What do we want to do? What are we good at? What are we interested in? There's the practical stuff. But actually, who am I and how do I fit in with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really important. Yeah, like, for myself, I was a chef, and I never even wanted to be a chef. I just kind of ended up in this career and worked my way up, and went to school. And then, when I was at the point of changing careers, I was at the point where I didn't even have another career lined up. I knew I wanted to get into sales, because a lot of chefs transition into sales.
Okay.
But, I went from an executive chef at a really nice winery restaurant to a dishwasher, not a dishwasher, sorry, to a breakfast cook. I started cooking breakfast at a golf course just so I could have nights off and weekends off.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what I did. I figured out what was important to me. I was reading this Dr. Joe book, Becoming Supernatural. And
Yeah.
on one side of the page, I wrote down, these are all the things I want in my career.
Yeah.
Um, like flexibility, more time with my family, all those things that I wanted. And then the other side of the paper, I wrote down how I'm going to feel when I get all that. And I used to, kind of meditate on it every day. But I was confident that I was going to have a sales job. I wanted a job selling seafood, which is what I do now. And I told my wife, I'm leaving my job and I'm going to have a sales job within 3 months was my goal. And then a job came to me within 3 weeks. But it was very exciting at first, but then it was very challenging. Changing careers at 42 years old can be very, challenging, trying to learn new things and doing things you've never done before. It was very, very, very frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is what keeps people, I guess stuck. That's the reality, isn't it? I hear that word a lot, because there is a lot around that fear that comes up for us, and there's always a transition, even if it's in the same industry, but we're just going up, or actually we want a complete change. There's going to be a period of unknown. There's going to be a period of uncertainty. We're going to have to back ourselves when actually maybe we don't have that much self-trust because we've lost a little bit of that along the way. So I kind of, ultimately, it's doing the self-knowledge part, like you described, the sitting down, the getting clear, the working out what you want, how do I want to feel, why is this important to me, that then gives us the ability to stand up and go, okay, now I get why it's important. Now I get, and it gives us the energy and the motivation to go after it. But if we don't do that part, the fear kind of sticks in the way and we stick to what we know, even if it doesn't make us happy.
And I know one of the biggest things that was holding me back was money, how much money I was making, because I was making a pretty good living. And then, so I guess my question is, if you have clients that want to make a career change, how does someone navigate making a career change when they kind of have to, when they're going from the top of their career and then and changing to a new career, but then starting at the bottom, so say going from making like $100,000 a year and now you're making, $50,000 a year. And I think that's what kept me in my job for so long, because I just told myself, I can't, take this big of a pay cut at this point in my life. So that's what was kind of holding me on there. So how would someone sort of navigate that sort of challenge?
Yeah, and that's the reality, isn't it? That I think, you see a lot of this kind of social media, view that we see peddled across is, leave your job and let's go and live in Bali and it'll be fine. And I think, yeah, we'd all love to do that. But like for a lot of us have got, big loans for houses and maybe cars, and we've got kids to pay for. And so there's somewhere within that, like, how do we make a transition and it be a reality check? But I think what happens, and how I try to support people with that, is that we get very much stuck, don't we? And it's either this, I either stay where I am and be unhappy, or I make this change that I'm not sure I can see through. I'm not sure I can see it through because it feels difficult, it feels tricky, there's uncertainty around money. So what I really try to encourage people to do is, there's no rush. There is no overnight miracle. So what there is several different ways to approach this transition. So let's look at them all. Let's map them out. Let's think, okay, so you've got option A, which is today, and you've got option B, which is the one that, will be maybe ideal, but you don't have to get there. Let's look at the other options. So for some people, for example, they might need to retrain. They might need to work 2 jobs. They might need to reduce their hours. They might need to be working in the local supermarket on a Saturday morning to pay for that night school. So, but what I try to help people do is remove the pressure that you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know exactly how it's going to work in this moment. There's time. But when you sit down, you map it out, you do the planning, you be realistic about the conversations with family and friends about, do you need support? It's the working out of how can we make it work, rather than this is all the reasons why I can't do it. Because none of us could do it if it was just a finance thing, to be fair. Like I would never, if it was just us, My husband went through the same thing. We had some really in-depth conversations about how important is this change to us? Like, that's going down to one car. That's maybe not a holiday this year. It's not doing the windows on the house if we want to. It's not buying Christmas presents for a couple of years. Like, only you know how willing you are to cut your cloth accordingly. How important is it to you? And that links back nicely to the self-knowledge. How important is our purpose and living a life that we are proud of, and how much, I guess, change are we willing to put ourselves through to get there? And there is no right and wrong. I work with people, some people are like, no, it's just not for me, I can't do that. And other people are willing to take longer and map it out. So I really advocate that whole one size, just doesn't work for everybody. It has to be that individual approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I know the big thing with us and my family was I went from, making more money than my wife to making less money than my wife. And that really, she supported me, but that really stressed her out. And then she thought, okay, now she has to work double to make up for it. So she went psycho, picking up extra hours and working like crazy. But definitely stressful. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people, it's easier just to stay where you are, even if you're not happy. And I think that's where a lot of people are at, unfortunately. But
that's so true. But as I think there are so many examples, aren't there, of where it can be done. And I'm really conscious that I'm never kind of flippant with people in the sense that, oh, don't worry about it, just quit your job. Of course there's a better job out there. Because the reality is it's not an easy decision. There is, like I said to you earlier, there's a lot in that. There's so much to consider, because it doesn't just impact us, it impacts our family and our lifestyle. There is a lot to consider. But the two options are, there's a lot to consider, so don't do it, or there's a lot to consider. So how do I approach it in a way that feels realistic and, sensible, and get the support that I might need, and map it out and move at my own pace? And that comes through turning down a phrase I use is turning down the volume on the noise. So the expectations, what people think we should be doing, how many cars and what kind of house people think we should have at our age after 20 years in a certain industry. Once we start to tune back into us and our family and the life we're trying to build, remove some of that external pressure. But I always fully acknowledge to people that, of course, this is a big decision, but is it big enough to sit with it for the next 30 years or 20 years or 10 years, depending on how close we are to retiring? And for some people, graduates straight from uni had maybe a year's work, and they're like, oh, this isn't what it's cracked up to be. Do the rethinking, do the mapping now. But it's work, and I never shy away from that conversation with clients. But it's also work and stress to stay in a really unhappy job for a very long time.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult one. Question for you. So when you work with your clients, do you have like a 12-week program you put them through, or is there like a specific program, or is it kind of individually tailored for each specific client?
Yeah, that's a great question, because as you'll know yourself, the people that we come into, kind of contact with in the personal development, self-development space, whether it's career or life coaching or whichever, they're individuals, people are individuals. But at the same time, they're coming to us because we can provide the structure that they need. So I work on a program that is designed, holistically over 6 modules. There's homework. I mean, nice homework, good homework. But I always make sure it's framed. This is a framework. It's a structure that will provide the space and will take you through the milestones and the steps that will get you where you need to be. That's my job as coach. That's what you're asking me, to provide you that structure and guidance. But absolutely within it, there must be flexibility to go off-piste, to think about things completely differently, to change your mind potentially, because as you'll know, through any period of transition, we are going to change our mind. We're going to get new thinking. We're going to grow a little bit in our thinking. So we might want to shift perspective or shift direction. So I'm always mindful that we need the structure because I know what works. I know what's going to help. I know the exercises that we need to go through so you can get the information to make the decisions. But you also need space to think for yourself and to, change your mind a little bit, go off and think about things, come back with fresh reflections.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so how would you guide someone to, if someone wanted to change careers but didn't know what they wanted to do, how would you sort of guide them on that? Is it kind of like finding out sort of, what they like to do? How does that sort of look like?
Yeah, and that's a great question because it's almost like the $1 million question, because actually, do we know what we want to do? Like, even for me, I love what I do now, but crikey, the path that I took to get here, it's not straightforward. Some of it was opportunities, some of it was strange situations in life where opportunities appear. So quite often, by the time people have realized they need some support in thinking about it, they'll have an inkling of what they think it could look like. They'll know what their skills are, but they don't know how to transfer them. They'll know what they know, but there's a big blind spot of actually how many skills they have that they don't realize, they could bring to a role. So we kind of strip it right back to the beginning, and we start very much with the individual. So very much around, well, let's get to the bottom, really, first of all, of who you are. What do you love? What are the things in life that are really important to you? What are the values that you want to find in the work that you do? It's almost like a filtering process. So gather all the information about the individual to start with, like, who are you? What lights you up? What are you good at? What are you passionate about? What are the hobbies? All the really ideal stuff. And then we get into more of the dry stuff. So what's your experience? What would your LinkedIn profile say? What are you technically great at on paper? What skills have you got? Where are the gaps potentially? And then we start to, I guess, almost overlap the two sets of information and think, well, how do we find that bit in the middle? So people will come along and say, I don't know what I want to do, but, I've always worked in education, for example. I love education, but actually I don't want to stay in the exact role that I'm in. So then we can start to look at, okay, so build the list. We talk about education, that's a huge space. There's probably hundreds of roles we've never even heard of in any university or any school system. So then we get into the research. What are the possibilities? How do we think really big? What's best case scenario? What is the, Sunlander and Bali job versus, so bring it all onto the table. So it's always about gathering data in that first phase. So who are we? What can we do? What are we capable of? What don't we know? What's our potential? And then what jobs, what industries, what sectors might we want to work in? So it's kind of like a methodical approach, really. It's gathering all the data, pulling all the threads together until eventually we think, right, I've got enough information here. I've built some self-trust and confidence along the way. I'm clear about who I am and the lifestyle that I want to create. Now we go away and we start mapping out, well, where might those jobs be? Where are the organizations that fit with my values? What kind of work pattern do I want to do? Where can I go that's going to offer me the flexibility to pick my kids up from school on time? So we start to build a picture. So does that make sense? So it's gather all the data, and then we start to filter it back down then into job roles, organizations. What do I want to do? How do I want to do it? And then, well, where do we start? And then running alongside the space for some of the more practical stuff, which is, of course, then, some people might have done a CV or a resume for 20 years. They might not, their LinkedIn profile might need updating. They might need to do a little bit of networking, start to, build some more professional relationships out there. So we do some of the practical stuff as well that will actually mean that when that job that you've identified, the organization has a position that you're interested in, or somebody actually does know somebody, how lovely things happen in life, don't they? And an opportunity arrives. How do you make sure you're prepared for it? That you're confident, that you're clear of what you bring to that role, and you can advocate for what you want and what you need from the company, so that it kind of follows that methodical approach. I'm making it sound very easy here. Of course, there's a lot of emotion in there as well, and like I say, changing of mind, but that's effectively the process that allows people to get all of the, things we worry about at 2 o'clock in the morning and all the stuff we do know, find out what we don't know, and start to unravel all of the information and bring it into a methodical career map, ultimately, that we can follow and takes you where you want to go.
Yeah, it is quite the process. I'm curious, your clients, like how long do you work with a client for through this transition? Because it could be a long process.
It could be a long process, and it's a great question again, because as you'll know, when you have discovery calls with clients and you kind of have an introduction, I'm always really mindful of trying to help people understand their own personality style and their own work style, so that we know that, how committed are we in this stage? Like, do you need 6 months, or is this a 3-month window? Or actually, are we just in an exploration phase and we'll see how it goes over the next 12 months? So I'm very mindful that, it's important to have some structure, but people are different. People have different approaches. They have different circumstances in life. So what works for one person might not work for another. Quite often people are bound as well by, which obviously you'll appreciate, they might have a 3-month notice period. They might be able to, have a gap between jobs. Some people don't. So it is very, flexible depending on the individual. Luckily, I've not had too many people that turn up and say, right, that's it. I've left, I've had enough. And I'm like, okay, well, that's a big start. Most people, I think, by the time they are ready to sit down and start mapping it out, are able to kind of, I guess, think about doing things in parallel. Well, how do I stay here a bit longer, but maybe retrain at night? Or how do I reduce my hours in this role and do some volunteering to get experience? So it's trying to encourage people to stay in a secure, stable space as long as possible before. There's no just jumping ship. There's no leaving one job and starting the next. There has to be some space in there. And it differs from people's circumstances.
Yeah, that's a smart way to do it. Make sure that you're all lined up. Don't just leave. Yeah. Sarah, I'm curious about your career transition. Now, you said you worked 13 years in a misaligned role. So I'm curious if you want to tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and it's interesting hearing that back, actually, because there were so many wonderful things, about it. So I fell into that role, and I fell into that it was a role within a healthcare organisation, but I was temping there. So I don't know if that's the same for you guys. You just kind of have a temporary job through an agency. Because I was actually at college studying horticulture, because I wanted to work with plants. I wanted to work on, be outdoors all the time. That was what I wanted to do. This is after kind of not going to university, traveling for 10 years, thinking one day I'll just wake up and know what I want to do. And that day never came until I thought, okay, well, I love gardening. I love plants. I love all of that kind of stuff. I'll go to college. Fantastic. But I had to pay for college. So I had to work part-time. And I got this role within a healthcare organisation that were just at the beginning of really thinking about how they supported their staff within the organisation. And they had a role for somebody to come in and help them coordinate their coaching programs. I thought, this is coaching, I never heard of this. This is exciting, it's all about personal development and things. And eventually, as that department got bigger, I decided to pick which lane I was in, and I really wanted to follow this passion that I developed for supporting other people, well-being in the workplace, staff engagement. So whilst the work I absolutely loved, and the opportunities I had to develop, I absolutely loved. As you'll again maybe appreciate some of the work, that you've done as a kind of working long hours, dancing to somebody else's tune. There was a high turnover of staff. Don't always have the best support from a leadership development. The ability to do the work and enjoy the work became less, because there's so many influencing factors around it that were out of my control. So whilst the work didn't feel misaligned, the setting within which I was doing it felt really difficult to keep going into. And then, of course, we had COVID, which changed things hugely in how the pressures that were provided and how we worked. And I thought, okay, how can I keep doing what I love, get better at what I love, but perhaps in a different environment where I can thrive and I can build my self-belief. Can you
Sorry,
hear that?
that's my dog. My dog
That's so
owls on
cute.
his-
Yeah. So I think, it was more about, I have a lot of fondness for the opportunities that the role provided and the learning, but the workplace culture was almost took any joy out of that. And I hear that a lot, unfortunately, from people I work with. It's not necessarily the job they've fallen out of love with. They're still highly skilled, really competent, great people within that role. But actually, there's no flexibility. The organisation can't offer flexibility, or they don't feel supported, or the general working environments are not particularly, conducive to people's well-being. I'm trying to pick my words really kindly there, but we all know what it's like to work in an environment that just drains us, and we feel undervalued. Yeah, so that's that really. I thought, well, I can carry on doing what I love, but in a different way. And here we are 4 years later.
That's great. Yeah, I remember a time in my career when you were talking, I just remembered this, that I used to leave work and I didn't have that feeling of being fulfilled at the end of the day. I felt like empty inside. And I remember I had that feeling for a long time, and I didn't like that. I didn't like that feeling, but that was my main sign that I wasn't really in alignment. I wasn't really feeling fulfilled at the end of the day. I needed to feel good about what I did, and I was in that job for 6 years, but it was convenient, and I just had a baby, and it was close to home. I was able to work and pick up my daughter and all that stuff. So that was that was all good. But it's a
and I think it's funny because there's sometimes there's this kind of understanding, I think, from people that in the space of work coaching or career coaching, it's because people can't get a job, or people, have no idea what they want to do, etc., or that they kind of, at a career crossroads and things just feel difficult for them. But actually, in my experience, I work with a lot of people that are actually really hugely successful people. They've built great businesses, or they have had fantastic careers. They've contributed a lot, they've got, the things that they thought they wanted and when they set off on their career journey, but actually they're at that point where, like you just said, that word of feeling unfulfilled. So, okay, so I've got all this and I'm working this hard and I'm putting all this in, and on paper it should be great and it should be giving me everything that I need. But on a human level, there's something missing here. Like that there's something doesn't feel aligned. And I think that's the big question when we get to work, life, legacy that we want to have when we look back when we're 80. What is it that we're trying to achieve here, really? Okay, people, on paper set out potentially, because the big house and the cars and the holidays and stuff, why not? There's no wrong or right, but I do hear from a lot of people that they can be working that hard, but still it's that fulfillment and sense of purpose that people tend to be looking for. But they don't necessarily know that to start with. It's just a career thing. It just feels like it sits under the career heading, which is why I shifted it from kind of old school career coaching more into holistic. Like, what's the bigger picture here? What's really going on for you? What's the need that you really need to pay attention to here?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing for me was my career was taking over my life. I didn't have a life, and I wanted to have a life.
Yeah.
And now I'm in this transition where I've just changed careers, and I'm so I have a full-time day job as well, and then I have this coaching business that I just started my coaching business this year. So now I'm in another transition where I'm trying to get my business off the ground while working a full-time job. So it's another almost like I'm in another transition.
Yeah. And that is something to hold on to, because And the amount of times I'll say that to people that this is not it. This is not come for the coaching, have the conversations, do the work, and that's the destination. We are always evolving. That's both the beauty and I suppose one of the things we grapple with as humans, because actually we are curious. We have an endless capacity for learning. We are more able and capable than we understand. So if you're curious of nature and you want to be of service and you want to have an impact in the world, then you probably will never settle. I know that about me. I'm at a point where things feel great, but there's always curiosity and ideas. So how do we allow space for us to keep, exploring and be okay with the fact that, we'll change our minds. We're bound to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like when I left the kitchen, I pretty much got everything I wanted in my job. I got everything I wanted, except for the money part. But then, then I'm sitting there looking, okay, I got everything I wanted, but now I want more. I got everything I wanted, and this is great, but now I want to go up here. And then when I get up there, then I'm going to want to go over here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think for so long, I was just so happy. What's the word? I was just so happy being stuck. I didn't want to grow anymore. I didn't want to learn anymore. I didn't want to, I had people telling me, you should be making this much money. You should be doing this. And I didn't believe them. And I thought, no, I don't want to make any more money because that means I'm going to have to work more. I don't want to work more.
Yeah. And I think that's the bit that's, I guess, comes down to people's conditioning, isn't it? And what we, think about the generation ago, I was thinking about my parents, that we didn't have the same amount of choice either that we have now, the same amount of options, which is wonderful in some ways, of course it is, but it also creates a sense of pressure. So one point, the expectation was just to, go to school. If you're really lucky, you'll get to further education, and then you'll potentially maybe settle down and have a family, and you'll get a job, and you'll work for 50 years in the same job. And now it's like the world has shifted massively in a space of what we could achieve, what we're expected to achieve, and actually what we just might be happy with, And I think a lot of people could be happy with less if they felt comfortable in mapping out what that looks like. Success for some people isn't always the more money, is it? They don't want to work more hours and have more status. Some people actually want more flexibility, more downtime, more freedom to, enjoy their weekends and not feel guilty about, leaving emails overnight. So it's working out, I guess, on an individual level as for my life to look and feel successful to me. What does that look like? And then how do I work towards that?
Mm-hmm. And tell me if I'm wrong. I could be wrong here, but I feel like the young generation looks at us and says, I don't want to work all day like these guys are when I can make money posting online or doing whatever. And I feel like there's a huge shift happening and people, they don't want to work the traditional jobs anymore because people are making a living posting online or doing whatever. So I'm curious, what's your perspective on that shift happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly an interesting one because I think about, I've got an 8-year-old boy, and I'm really conscious that the job that he will be doing probably hasn't even been invented yet. It doesn't even exist. Like when I was younger, I think when I was at school at the point of, career choice or going, further education, the internet didn't even exist. So the social media didn't even exist. It's like the world's moving at such a pace that I think, it's a strange view of the world, I think, at the moment because it's moving so fast. And I think massively encouraged that we should be able to be more flexible in how we work and have that wraparound and that choice, and how do we access time for well-being and friends and family and be earning a living. But I don't think we're quite there yet in what feels like a realistic expectation. I think we've got to find some balance because we don't, for example, here, it's great for me to want to have a certain work life a certain way and role model that to my little boy. But I don't have the childcare support because the school day is too short, for example, and childcare is really expensive. So I think at the moment we love the idea of, working less, earning more. And yes, that's a vision that I hold on to. But I think there's a long way to go until we can actually get it to work in practice, en masse. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. the traditional approach to work is definitely fading.
Yeah, interesting. I have an 8-year-old daughter as well. Yeah, that's interesting to think of. The jobs that they're going to be doing might not even be invented yet. That's wild to think.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully, the traditional ones we're going to need teachers and doctors, and, there's going to be a huge space where people will want to go into those professions. But even the expectation of what that should look like, should we be expecting people to have to still work 80 hours a week, in a healthcare setting because there's not enough staff, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the world of work itself, it is just going to always evolve. And I think the choice is, how do we find out how we want to show up in that space, rather than stay put just because that's what's expected or what's always been done. I know for my parents, it's hard for them to understand, well, why we shouldn't be working in the evenings, evenings should be sitting down and relaxing and watching the TV. And I think, yeah, but I work for myself now and I have a small child. So, and actually I'm quite creative in the evening. So I have a couple of hours off at tea time. So I can definitely be present for dinner as a family and bedtime, and, take the dog out for a walk. And then I choose to work in the evenings because that's the point of having flexibility. For the previous generation, it was, no, my mum's like, no, you're working far too hard. I think I'm not working harder necessarily, but I'm just working different. It's unfamiliar. So, but it's a learning curve for sure.
And that's the beauty of having your own business, is you can work, what's best for you. If you're a morning person, you can get up and work in the morning. If you're a night person, you can work at night. You can do whatever's best for you and for your schedule.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why I try to focus on the kind of work-life, philosophy rather than career versus home life, because actually more often than not, the two things are so intertwined, aren't they? It's very, very difficult, regardless of whether you're self-employed or you're in an organization, to have a clear cut-off point. I think that's becoming harder, the more flexible and hybrid working and home working and things. That boundary is becoming really blurred for people. And I think that's where it's important to have clarity on those boundaries, whichever way we're approaching work. It's a big topic. I love it.
Yeah. And speaking of work-life balance, like, how important is work-life balance for someone's, happiness?
Yeah, so I have a kind of maybe quite a fixed view on this now, because I really steer clear of the phrase work-life balance, because I just don't know if it's possible. The kind of view of work-life balance is to be able to have enough of both, and to keep something balanced is to keep those things, at equal paces. So whether you're employed or you work for yourself, I'm not sure balance is really ever attainable. So what I try to do is think of it as a work-life rhythm. So what's the rhythm that I need, and how do I let those two things work in parallel and work together, rather than having, work and home, and actually ultimately those things having friction, because they will never be balanced. One will always be pushing against the other. But by recognizing that, it's helped me, and I work with clients and my husband as well. He works for himself, and it's actually, how do we create a rhythm that works for us individually, our businesses, and as a family collectively. And it's a conscious effort. I think it's like we talked about before, it's ever changing as kids change, as families change, as our work demands and our contracts and clients change. So rather than striving to have a balance, I'm really mindful that there's got to be some fluidity here. There's got to be some flexibility. Yes. I don't know how that sounds when I say it out loud to somebody else, but yeah.
It's an interesting thing, work. I'm not sure if I'm going to say this properly, but most people don't like going to work. I heard this somewhere. I can't remember exactly where I heard it, so I'm going to say this wrong. But most people don't like going to work, but most people are happiest when they're at work. Have you heard something about this before?
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing because, we're at work and we want to be at home. And then, we have like a week off we're at work and we wish we're on vacation. Then we're on vacation and we're worried about work. I don't know where I'm going with this, or what I'm trying to say with this is that most people, what am I trying to say? Is that even though we may not realize it, we enjoy working.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that correct? Am I going crazy here? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean in the sense that, and again, I think it comes down to the phrases, doesn't it, and the terminology that we use. So I think people, when we talk about work, we think about it as this thing we go out and we do and we get paid for it and then we come home and we have a life. But actually, for people, it's on having that sense of purpose. So for a lot of people, getting up and going to work, they might not necessarily love their work per se, but actually it gives them a sense of purpose. They know they need to be somewhere. They've got a role to perform. They're needed. They're of value somewhere. So I think if we didn't work, I think, gosh, what would I do if I didn't work? I would just tool around all day. And I think, but I wouldn't need a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
I think what happens is that, because you're right with some of the statistics there, so many people don't like work. I mean, the statistics around the amount of people that are currently going into a role but are actively disengaged. So they're showing up and they are in work, but they are actively disengaged, is a lot more than it should be. I mean, I think in the UK, it's somewhere kind of in the 60 to 70% bracket.
Wow.
So that's a lot of people showing up, being paid to do a job that they don't really want to do. So, yeah, and it's for a very long time. So I kind of think we need to shift our view of work, don't we? When we talk about work, what is that? Actually, it's more, we need to connect to that sense of purpose. And like, and like I'll say, and it sounds very cheesy and cliche, but now that I'm getting to do something that I really enjoy and I love it, it doesn't feel like work.
Mm-hmm.
It is. I spend more hours in the work zone than I ever have done. But it's not the same source of stress because I'm building something I love. It's connected to my purpose. I can see where I'm adding value and making a difference. So I think people like the security and want to feel needed and get up in the morning, drive somewhere for a reason. That's what conditioned. That's what we all be doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I noticed that a while ago. I took a week off from work, and surprisingly, I missed it. But I took a week off from work to work at home. I was working on my own stuff. I got a question for you. How important do you think it is for someone to love their job, love what they do?
Yeah, I mean, what a great question. And again, I think that there's a moment of reality check here when I'm talking to clients, because I love what I can do in the right set of circumstances. But even for me, that's striving really hard to build a great work life, it doesn't mean it's not hard. And it doesn't mean some days it's really actually difficult and it makes me want to pull my hair out. So I think it's the same question around happiness, isn't it? Like, we strive to be happiness, but actually, is happiness, or is a job that we love, something we'll do every single day for the next 40 years? How do we measure that? For me to be happy at work will be very different to what somebody else needs to be happy at work or to love their job. For some people, as long as it keeps them safe and pays their mortgage and they get to finish at 3:00 on a Friday afternoon, that could be enough. But for other people, depending on their values, they want to be making an impact. They want to have a legacy. They want to be influencing other people. Depending on the values and what they want to bring to the table, will, I guess, help them identify how much work matters to them and how much it means to them. So I think it's important that we do something that we don't hate, that we don't wish we weren't there all the time, that we're not spending every waking minute at work wishing it was the weekend. So I think, can we all love our work all of the time? Possibly not. There's going to be days where it's difficult, but should the favor be towards just enjoying it, being happy most of the time at work, seeing where we add value, then yeah, it matters way more than just putting up with it and being miserable for 40 years.
I heard some.
Good question.
I heard someone say once that we don't have to love what we do. I'm butchering this again. This isn't correct. We don't have to love what we do, but we have to sort of have a job that's going to allow us to do what we love. Is
Yeah.
kind of what the person said.
Yeah. And I think, and this again comes back to the purpose part of it, which is a big question when I first start working with clients, because that's the reality, isn't it? That we might not find a job that we love, but there will be elements of it that we're really good at and we feel really fulfilled by. And we can see where we're making a difference. So it's doing the things that, if you're good. So for example, if you're really good at maths and you are, so naturally you could be a really great accountant. Okay. So those are things that come easy to you. You could be really great with figures, numbers, maths, all the rest of it. You could make a living from that. But actually, do you want to be doing that 5 days a week? Could you use those skills and the stuff that you're naturally good at in a different way? So it could be the same job, but in a different organization that's more aligned with your values. So how do you pull out the bits that are going to bring you enjoyment, that you can see how you're making a difference, that when you go to bed at night, you think, yeah, that was a good day at work today. I achieved something, that meant something. It's not going to be gold and shiny every day for any of us. But if we are somehow, it feels like it matters and it feels like we're making a difference. That could be, whether you're the CEO of the company or it could be the person delivering the mail, depending on which way you look at it, So it does come down to that sense of purpose individually as to what do I need from this to feel fulfilled. And it's different for everybody.
That's a big thing for me too, having that feeling of, a sense of purpose or accomplishment or something at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I need to feel good about myself. And something funny, when you were talking about the weekends, I used to get so excited for the weekends and my days off.
Yeah.
Back in the day there. But the funny thing is now, since I've changed careers, I don't hate my job as much anymore. So I don't have that like excitement for the weekends anymore. So that's an interesting thing that's gone now, but I'm okay with that. It's just amazing. I think it's like the more you hate your job, the more excited you get for your days off. Very interesting.
Yeah.
All right, Sarah, this has been a great conversation. We're getting close to the end of our time here. So before we wrap things up, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners? Is there anything that we didn't cover today that you'd like to add?
No, I don't think so. I think really, for anybody that is at a point where they just think, really, I've just had it. I cannot keep coming in here every week, and I've been promising myself for 6 months, a year, 2 years, that I'll change job and I haven't. I just would really encourage people to give themselves permission to just at least explore what that looks like. The fear, the self-doubt, the stress of that is real and I get it. So I would never be flippant. But if it's there for you, that desire for change, and you think you could do more, you think you could be happier somewhere else, you think you've got potential, at least give yourself permission to explore it, Be curious, ask the questions. I think that's it. I think it's never about go away, make a decision and get on with it. It's like, just give yourself space to explore it. Just ask the questions.
I love that. Beautiful. And where can people find you if they like to connect with you, Sarah?
So I always have to get this bit right because, so I have a website and it is Sarah Green Coaching at co.uk. Yeah. And I'm on Instagram. So you can see that like the whole technology vibe isn't my natural space. But I'm on Instagram, which actually I'm okay with now. I've settled in. And my it's just at Sarah Green Coaching on there. I'm hoping you'll have some show notes where it's a bit more succinct.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That was great, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You.
And for everyone listening, I'll include Sarah's information in the show notes below.
Yeah. Thank
Beautiful.
you, Jason.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Awesome. And for everyone listening, I'll include Sarah's information in the show notes below, which I already said. And if you'd like to connect with me, You can find me on Instagram at transformative_pathways. You can also find my link tree in the show notes below, where you can find links to all my social media, my email list, my private community, and options to book a free consultation or apply to my one-on-one coaching programs. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you could like, subscribe, and follow us on your favorite listening platform. And if you'd like to support the show, we'd be so grateful if you could take a moment to leave us a review. It would mean so much to us and also help the show reach more listeners. Thank you so much for being with us today, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.
This has been the Transformative Pathways Podcast with your host, Jason Dobie. Tune in each week for more insights, inspiring stories, and transformative journeys. Until then, keep exploring the path to keep your best self. Saturdays, 3 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network, powered by B2 Studios.